Welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast. Tonight's episode, we're going to be looking at a concept that we introduced last week called the unconscious feedback loop. And extending that concept and kind of looking at an interplay between a couple of dynamics here. So, Brian, if you'd like to set us up with a quick reiteration of the concept of the unconscious feedback loop.
Yes, so this is something that we've covered before. We talked about it a little bit last week in the episodes we did on cult indoctrination, but we also have done it in another previous episode where we really dive into depth in that. So if you guys haven't checked that out, go back and check out that episode. That'll be available. But essentially how this works is what we'll be doing is looking at the the Helleval, or can also be seen as the Yggdrasil in Norse mythology here. And what this represents is the 9 worlds in Norse mythology. And each one of them correlates with a different level of our psychology. And then when we look at this, we can kind of see how a cycle of energy and things flow with it. And by analyzing the different parts and things that can happen, we uncovered a feedback loop. So I'll go ahead and introduce the 9 worlds. Obviously in the center, this is Midgard. Midgard both is a representation of our physical reality field, but also you are Midgard. In the north, this deals with, this is Niflheim. It deals with unmanifested potential energy. The realm of Asgard in the northeast deals with our belief systems, and it is also where energy just starts to come into manifestation, but hasn't quite made it to this physical reality yet. Jotunheim is the realm of the east. This is the realm that deals with our ego and how we interact with ourselves. In the southeast, we have Svartalfheim. That's the realm that deals with our subconscious mind, where we create from. In the south, that's Muspelheim. This is the fire home. This deals with our actions. In the southwest, this is Helheim. This is the realm of our unconscious mind, and this will be one of the worlds that is a key focus of this talk. In the west, we have Vanaheim, which is the realm of how we deal with others. The northwest is the realm of the elves, Alfheim, which is our ancestral guides, ascended masters, perfected immortals is what they're known as in the Taoist tradition. And then obviously all these energies come to play in Midgard in you. So how this unconscious feedback loop works is whenever there is deep unconscious trauma in Helheim, it can open up what is known as a ghost door. And we can also see this understanding reflected in the Taoist tradition, known as the same thing in what is known as the Bagua. There's a ghost door between the southwest and the northeast. So when we have unconscious trauma, it can open up a ghost door and then bypass these other worlds. And what happens is that trauma feeds into our higher belief systems. And then once they're in our higher belief systems, we start to identify them in the realm of ego, because understand that this is a cycle of energy that's in constant motion. So, trauma goes to our belief systems, that feeds into our ego. We start to identify with those belief systems. So then they get pushed down into our subconscious mind, which causes us to take action on them and push them further into our unconscious mind. But when we're acting from unconscious trauma, what happens is we really get cut off from being able to truly connect with other people, because we're just unconsciously projecting all the time, and we kind of get stuck in this loop. So we really get cut off from a true connection with other people. We get into a state where we're not really listening to our guides. And very importantly, we cut ourselves off from new potential energy that could possibly be there to help get us out of the cycle. But when we don't have those things, it just becomes this cycle, that feeds and feeds, and then people, get stuck in very dogmatic belief systems. So that is essentially how that works.
Right. And that, like you said, that third the northern position is the one that's really going to be relating, as the name of this talk is why history repeats. So that's the concept that we're looking at here, and we want to kind of start by examining a certain dichotomy that tend to be two of the biggest forms of mind control in our society, and that is religion and statism. And both are a fear-based system of control that are based upon coercion. And what you have is the fear of jail and the fear of hell. So, jail is a place that will restrict the freedom of your physical body, and then hell is the promise to confine and torment your soul. So you're being attacked psychologically from all the mental, the physical, and the spiritual realms all at once. I mean, they really have you in a gridlock of control there, but with fear. It's the threat of this that really runs the system. So we're going to look at each one of those in depth tonight, and we're going to start with the concept of statism. So let's start, as we usually do, by defining our terms. So Brian, do you want to go ahead and what is statism? And we're specifically defining it without using euphemisms here. What really is it?
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think it's very important to go ahead and be able to do that. Statism is the belief system that and advocation for one group of human beings to be able to use violence, force, and coercion against other human beings in order to control them. And when we really look at that beyond, the elections and the politicians and suits, we can really see it's just a system of domination and control, also known as, slavery. Because when we really look at it, the idea that one group of human beings has the right to make dictates and commands and that other human beings have to follow those. And if they don't, the first group is then allowed to use violence, intimidation, and or take away their freedom by putting them in chains in a cage for however long they determine. We can really see that there's something very wrong in this mindset, and it's definitely goes to show how much unconscious trauma is really there for something like this to be so widely accepted as it is. So I think it'll be very interesting to delve into some of these.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good definition you gave there, because it's essentially the belief and the advocation that we have a master class and a slave class. That's another way you could look at it. So it's all built on unconscious trauma, which relates back to this concept that we're talking about and how that plays out. So and this starts from a very young age. That's the problem with these subtle forms of mind control, is that we're raised into that, and it has this normalcy to it, that when you're a child and you're new to this world and you're coming into it, you're just coming into the world and like you see, well, this is just how things are done, right? And the adults, they must know better, so I just accept that they know what they're doing and just go along with it. And then by the time they're at the age of reason, they're already so traumatized and just sort of desensitized to it that they never really question it, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely interesting to look at. And, this ties back into a concept that we've talked about before in a previous episode of healing the wounded warrior in the first part. And when we talk about people being raised to where they get stuck into a mindset of understanding the world isn't safe. So then they get stuck into thinking that, everything is dangerous. So that leads to being pushed into kind of a predator-prey mindset.
Right.
And when you think everything is dangerous and you're kind of stuck in this stagnation of this predator-prey mindset, it can really lead to laying the foundations for accepting other belief systems like social Darwinism and, then things that come along with that as well. Social Darwinism essentially being, just like the idea of Darwinism with evolution, that, might makes right and it's normal for certain species to prey upon others. That is extending that into human society as well. So it's totally normal for certain groups of people to dominate and control other human beings in order to get what they want.
Right.
So we can see how, keeping people in these states of fear and in these states of being traumatized are really essential for getting them to kind of adopt that mini-me predator prey mindset that's needed to be able to enact these systems of control and keep them in place.
Yeah, and what that brings up for me is how a lot of people when discussing with someone who thinks that the state is necessary and trying to get them to consider some other possibilities of how we could be just fine if not better without these systems of domination in place. Something that comes up a lot is this idea of the power vacuum, right? Like, well, if we didn't have the politicians and the police and all this kind of stuff, well, somebody else would just step in there, fill the power vacuum, and so better the devil, right? So at least this way we get to vote and choose our master, as opposed to just leaving it up to chance, so to speak. It's really a total projection there, because they're assuming that no one really wants to be ruled, right? When they vote, they're voting for someone else to go and point the guns at the other guys and say, you're going to behave the way we want. As soon as the guns are and the laws, so to speak, are pointed at them suddenly, oh, we're so oppressed and the government's out of line. So it's just kind of ironic that they themselves don't want to be ruled, but yet they're assuming that like we have to have this ruling class, or else everyone else is just vying for that position, as if every person has that psychopathy mindset that are looking for power over other people, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that interesting, hitting on the point of projection, because it could be one, it could be them reacting out of having encountered individuals in their lifetime where they felt, traumatized, they were in a dangerous situation. So then they then take that experience and kind of project that ability to be dangerous onto others. They don't become hurt, or it's people that just don't feel that they're actually fully in control of themselves. So then they also take and project that onto other people. When really a healthy person who is, not that anybody is ever all the way healed, or, you're at a place where you don't need to continue to work, but when you're actively doing the work and you have tools that you can tap into the unconscious mind and, work with those with, intention, you're in a lot better position to not get caught in those, unconscious loops, because you have the tools and access to be able to reflect and work with some of those things that all of us have to deal with. But if we're not dealing with them, they, can really take control of a lot of our patterns of behavior. I think another interesting thing here that we can look at is when we accept this foundational belief system that, in statism, that, some human beings have the right to control other people. What it really does is it cuts us off from our true full potential that we could have in connecting with other human beings in a healthy way that's in alignment with cosmic law. Because if we're accepting a belief system where we're not even respecting the sovereignty and the freedom of other individuals, like we actually advocate for violence to be used against them to enforce whatever the current belief system is, we can't really say that we're honestly respecting other people. And again, a lot of this behavior is coming from, the realm of the unconscious mind. That's really the key to all this. So keep this in mind that, as you're listening to this, you may be thinking that, oh, consciously I may, I don't advocate for that, or that's not what people are doing. But, I implore you to look deeper and really reflect on it honestly. Because that unconscious trauma is so difficult to actually look at and work with. And, until you do that work, it's really going to set up this feedback loop. And so if you're noticing cycles and patterns in your life where you're advocating for the same thing, or you're getting stuck in the same old loop, something like this is probably at play. So I think, that's also a very interesting point to look at, is how by accepting a belief system where we're not respecting others, really kind of also, when we add that to the unconscious trauma, that right there, kicks in that feedback loop. Because not only, does it open that ghost door, but it cuts off the connection, from really connecting through the rest of the cycle.
Right. And, and of course, continuing up that to the top again and that's the realm of unmanifested potential. And so when you're taking that ghost door through and not going fully around in the proper cycle, you're still creating from that unconscious trauma, and you're just going to keep repeating old cycles, old patterns, and most importantly, old behaviors. Taking it back to the trivium, we know that action is what creates change in our reality field. So, taking it back to the title of this talk, why history repeats, that's what you're looking at here, is this dynamic of just going around and bypassing and missing out on that one where you're not going to get anything new if you're still operating from old programs, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what that brings up for me too is the importance of being cut off from that access to that potential manifested energy there, that new potential, is really goes back to being cut off from the imagination, or the imagination, as I like to call it, which is where our ability to create new things comes from. So when we can get cut off from that, we get people, who can become stuck in, the mindset of, one you hear a lot, obviously, or who's going to build the roads, or, who would take care of this, or how would this get done? It's all these, what ifs, and they don't really have any potential ideas or solutions like there. And they don't even really have the ability to tap into their imagination when they're acting from this unconscious trauma, because they're stuck in this feedback loop. So they're cut off from that, access to that world, really.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that, if I'm being honest, it kind of irks me a little bit, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where I'm simply trying to point out the inherently immoral basis that statism is built upon. And time again, I get told things like, oh, well, I'd be all for that, but I would just need to hear how things would work. I would need to see more plans or whatever, like, actual theories on how things would work differently aside from it. In other words, it's total pragmatism, and moral relativism. They're like, well, Yeah, that sounds nice and all, but if it's not practical, then who cares if it's moral, right?
Mhm.
That's essentially what they're telling you.
Mhm. Well, and what that brings up for me too is it also leads to a lack of, a person who falls back on putting the responsibility on other people,
Mm.
instead of like tapping into the imagination and being able to come up with a new solution, a new idea, a new way of doing things.
Right. I
They
mean,
just,
that was my general sentiment.
mhm,
Really, is like once you have made it painfully obvious to this person, oh wow, I've never, because when I first heard about the concept of anarchy or self ownership or whatever word you want to use,
mhm,
whichever word doesn't scare you, um, that's um, you, my feeling wasn't like, well, well, it sounds nice and all, but it was new to me. I had literally never heard anyone speak in this way or describe it in such a way, and by that I mean without the euphemisms, actually calling
mhm,
it what it is. And so what I would like to see from people is like, oh my gosh, like you're so right, or not you, like, feed my ego, but wow, that's totally correct. I see it now. Let's put our heads together and come up with a better way that doesn't involve slavery.
mhm.
How about that?
Right. Yeah, and again here, I think we can go ahead and look more at the concept of jail. And what it really is, you know, first the whole system, it kind of starts on, different levels of coercion. There's like maybe a threat of fines, there may be, a threat of whatever it may be. But then that can then obviously get to the point of arrest, which is them actually going and taking the action, enforcing that coercion that is leading, to your loss of physical freedom. Where they actually will then go and put you in chains and then put you in a cage. Okay. So yeah, essentially, they use these euphemisms like, jail or whatever other euphemism they use, but rather than actually people looking at what that action really is that they're taking, one human being is taking chains and putting another human being in a cage for whatever the reason may be. But, you know, having this threat, of this out there really keeps most people under control. And then when they actually do enact it out, they really like to do that because it then sets that example, if you act out against the system, this is what's going to happen to you.
Hmm.
Um, and we can see throughout history plenty of examples of when, some kind of system of domination was trying to control anyone who would rebel, they would then make an example of those people as a way of
Right.
keeping everybody else in a state of fear. Um, I
Yeah,
think
it's
that's
kind of like the layers. It's the coercion ultimately that does it, because it's like your freedom's really only, your physical freedom is only taken away when they put you in a cage. But as soon as they threaten threaten you with violence, to dictate a certain behavior, your free will is already being infringed, and you are,
mm,
you're under duress. Your
mhm,
your your free will is now being impeded with this. Well, this is what I really want to do, but I also don't want to get, you know, beaten and thrown in a cage. So, that's, um, but like another thing I wanted to, sort of compare this idea of jail, as a artificial proxy for natural law. It's supposed to be this like prestigious form of consequentialism, right? It's like, well, what do the apologists always say? Well, don't break the law and that won't happen. But ultimately, since so few of the laws are actually in alignment with morality at all, then, yes, it's teaching actions have consequences, but the only thing it's actually teaching is that the state has the right to to force on you whatever it wants, and it doesn't matter if the law is moral or valid at all, because you'll be punished regardless. So natural law is here in place to develop spiritual beings through the apophatic learning system and teaching you correct from incorrect behavior. That's why it's there. That's how it operates. And it's just as when, taking it back to what we've talked about before, when when a child asks the parent why, and they say, because I said so, they're not teaching that child the true consequences of real life action and consequences. All it's teaching them is, I'm an authoritarian and obedience is a virtue, because otherwise bad things will happen to you that you inherently don't want, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, I mean, you can see how harmful that is, and how the people that set these systems up, they understand how the universe works. They have this deeper knowledge of the esoteric world, and that's why it's mimicking the laws of nature, except that they aren't the laws of nature, and therefore they're corrupted from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think another thing we can look at here too is how extensive the use of gaslighting, and especially through things like euphemisms, how they're used to support the gaslighting,
Right.
are to keeping this mindset in place. They'll, for example, they'll, just calling, for example, they'll call, the police, they'll say that they're there to, serve and protect, they're there to help everybody. But really, we've examined that in a previous episode, and we know that's not the case at all.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
On the other side of that, you have outlaws and criminals. Like, they have these very negative stigmas to them, when that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person or that they're out there harming people. A criminal is somebody who parks without paying the meter, or somebody who jaywalks. I mean, nasty jaywalking criminals. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. And it really, lies on that a lot. And gaslighting, as we talked about before, obviously is one of the main techniques, that psychopaths use, or narcissist people who are in a abusive kind of relationship dynamic with another human being, for, no matter what kind of relationship that is, actually messing with people's minds to the point they believe something that is just totally not true at all. That is a very, very deep form of traumatizing people, because you're making it to where they feel like they can't even trust themselves. So again, putting all that responsibility, taking that sovereignty away, and then putting it, outside of yourself. I think that's definitely, a huge key to being able to look at that. So I think, looking at the terminology that, politicians use or police use, whatever it may be, very, very interesting. And then, stop and ask yourself, well, what actually is happening there? Let's look beyond the euphemism. And I think, a very interesting thing that we can observe here too is, when people come from a fear-based mindset, they're always living their life based on what ifs. And one of the things I like to remind myself of is that when we're living our life based on what ifs, we forget to live our life based on what is. And these what ifs can include a whole range of things, from, anything from, being afraid of criminals, to poverty, to invasion, to, who's going to, take care of the infrastructure, or who's going to do this, or, what if this happens? All these fear-based mindsets. But these people that are worrying about this, when they're trying to use these as excuses, for justifying the state, they don't have any actual proof any of these things will happen. It's just something they, think might happen. But meanwhile, they're actually ignoring what really is, and the reality of the actions that they're actually taking and the things that they're advocating for that are having real world effect on our reality field and the quality of life for everyone around them. So then they're just, again, they're acting from this unconscious loop. So they're totally unaware of how they're contributing and stuck in this cycle of trauma.
Mm-hmm. And then and that's true in and of itself, but then let's not forget this whole other thick layer of irony coming in, that these things that they're afraid of and begging the government to save them from is the things that the government is doing. The government creates poverty by manipulating and regulating the economy. They are the biggest terrorists on the planet. They are the biggest criminals. I mean, that's that Stockholm Syndrome shining through like crazy right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I'd say we could even tie that back to, gaslighting, where, you have a person that's actually an abuser, but yet you think they're your savior. I mean, that's a person that's totally, has been gaslighted. And we can get, I think looking at projection, is another useful thing here, so when people, they'll, as we were talking about it a little bit earlier, where, some of the reasons they'll actually advocate for these belief systems is because, they feel afraid other people shouldn't be trusted because, they might go and harm other people. But that's really coming from their own inner projection of feeling, out of control themselves, because they're at some level they sense this unconscious trauma, and there's probably some rage and anger and things like that in there, but they keep trying to suppress them. So then it ends up being projected out onto everybody else, but meanwhile, all the time they're consciously trying to, push that down and bury it.
Wow.
And projection really, you can see it in anyone advocating for this belief system. There's a whole lot of projection going on, and it can be played out in many different ways.
Totally. And that brought up a major ping for me when you mentioned like the sense of control, because that's absolutely what unhealed trauma that is still residing below the surface is always going to cause you to engage in destructive, harmful, and addictive behaviors that give you a sense of control. But then the irony here is, when you reach for that drug or whatever, and it's giving you that temporary sense of control, the irony is that it owns you. You actually are powerless against it because you can't cope without it. And you could also kind of parallel that back to the government, how people think they are the government and we control the government by voting and stuff, when it is absolutely ruining, and wreaking havoc on people's lives on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Very interesting parallel there.
Excellent, for sure. And I think another interesting thing we can delve into here is kind of the cult mentality behind statism, and how it really is a cult mentality. And I think a really great example that you had brought up when we were chatting earlier was the whole if you stomp my flag, I'll stomp your ass kind of, character that we can see, here in America.
Right.
That, these people that are so stuck with worshiping the state because, it is their God, that's what they truly believe in, because they're stuck in this dogmatic feedback loop, that they're actually willing to enact violence on anyone who's not adhering to their specific belief system. And obviously, we've talked about with cults before, our last few episodes have been, themed around cult mindsets. The theme throughout it is, not only will they build up the mindset of, who's inside the cult, to work, kind of build up that narcissistic ego, but they will demonize anyone outside of the cult. And that demonization can get to the point that it actually leads to even extreme violence. And then we can, we've seen that played out throughout history, many different examples time and time again.
Right. What's coming up for me right now is what happened in Waco, and how those people were just essentially being anarchists and wanting to be left the hell alone. And the cult members that work for the ATF, well, we just can't be having that. So they went in there, and what did they do? They slaughtered them. They murdered those people, and then gaslighted them by saying, well, they were a bunch of crazy, cult members. The irony there, total projection.
Yeah.
That's like a textbook example right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
very interesting.
and then of course, that just blatantly displaying their utter lack of understanding of sovereignty and natural rights, thinking that they have some sort of right and even a moral obligation to assault someone for stomping on a piece of cloth that was made in a different country, by the way. Not even made in America. It's made in China, probably.
Yeah.
And they think that that's okay. They have zero clue that they do not have the right to take that action.
Right.
And they think they'll be praised for that. They get to brag about, yeah, I beat their asses for stomping on my flag.
Right. Yeah, you express how free your country is by, showing people they don't have freedom to express how they want.
Exactly.
But I think what this can lead here to, and we can look at, is, and this is a foundational thing that this kind of mindset in society, this dominator mindset, is built on, is a lack of care, a lack of the sacred feminine. And how really important that is to getting people stuck into a dominator mindset. You want to kind of delve into that, Logan?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it all comes down to, in that you can't take an action like that. You can't assault somebody that's stomping on a flag if you are connected with your empathy, right, and your compassion. It's this total heartlessness. It's the left brain programming, like literally running like a computer program. Oh, they're doing the bad thing, I must, and whatever. It's a total death of the feminine within, and this is way too common. I mean, it's pretty much the standard nowadays, when it comes to these things. And that's the odd part, though, is people tend to be pretty decent, more or less, in general, until it comes to these certain things like statism, for example. It's like all that good, what they know about being a good person goes right out the window, and the mind control takes over. It's like it's like they make an exception or whatever. Stealing is wrong, but taxation, well, we need that, and that's perfectly fine because it goes to things that we all use and blah blah blah. I mean, the list goes on and on about how that. But essentially, one thing that I picked up from Larkin Rose's program, The Candles in the Dark, is when you're questioning people about their beliefs using the Socratic method, rather than talking at them and ranting about how they just don't get it or whatever, making these very vitriolic and fiery statements at them, towards them. You're asking them questions and letting their answers about their own beliefs lead the conversation, and then you just sort of guide them to the cognitive dissonance in their own brain. One of the most effective things that you can do there is lead them by forcing them to look at what they're actually advocating. So when you say, if there was a law about marijuana, for example, and you ask that person, do they think that marijuana is bad, and they're like, well, not really. And then you say, but it's the law, though. Now, what would you have me do, or what would you have the government do to me if I broke the law? And then they would be like, well, men with, the police would come. No, that's not what I asked. What would happen? I said, what do you personally advocate happen to me if I say didn't pay taxes or something. And
Mhm.
then the reason that's so effective is and they'll do everything they can to squirm and deflect and change the subject and somehow say what you didn't say or whatever, because they know damn well if they answer that question honestly, it's going to make them sound like an absolute psychopath, because it's true. The system is psychopathic, and by advocating for it, that kind of makes you one by an extension in some capacity. It's
Mhm.
just, it's just logic. I mean, that may seem harsh, but
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's definitely very useful to do, is to be able to actually like make people take it back personally, because I think again, this is a theme that's coming up here with the cult mindset is so much of it, the lack of personal sovereignty and everything, the responsibility being put outside of themselves. So when you're asking them the question, you're making them respond like, well, what do you actually personally advocate happen
ooh,
to me? What do you think should happen? So
right.
you're turning that inward, and I think that's very useful for getting them back into a mindset where they can start thinking for
Thinking
themselves.
for themselves. Ooh, that's a great point, Brian. That's absolutely right. You're holding their feet to their fire and making them accountable,
Mhm.
because they are sovereign, whether they want to be or not, whether they think
Yeah.
they voted their rights away. You're always responsible for you and your actions and what you advocate, regardless of what you believe.
Mhm. Right. And the last little kind of point here we wanted to look at on the statism side of things was just taxes, and how it really kind of controls where your energy goes, and you're putting your energy to feed a beast that can't actually produce energy on its own. That was one of the things we had talked about in our previous episode that we did with Thundra, was about how much the cult can control where your energy flow goes,
Mm,
because then that leaves you stuck to where you can't have that energy to use it somewhere else. So they're controlling your charge. And
right.
looking at it from the magical perspective, obviously, we know how valuable energy is.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
that's
when you're taking your
that's a
energy,
very
feeding
oh,
it,
sorry, go ahead.
okay, yeah, when you're taking your energy and then feeding it into something, you know, that is so out of alignment with cosmic law, it ends up kind of creating this beast, but that, it wouldn't be existing if people would just stop putting their energy into it. But
Stop feeding it. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead
I
with what
mean,
you're saying.
yeah, I think that's a very simple and powerful way to tell, um how do I put this? Like, to tell the goodness or the wholesomeness of a thing is something that's deriving power from within, which means they're in alignment with truth and nature and their own true core essence, has no need to siphon energy off of anyone else. So if something is relying like an energy vampire on other people to give it and feed it, that right there is showing you that's not something that's good, that you need to be feeding at all. You know.
Mhm. It's a virus, a mind virus.
Yeah.
Um, and that leads us into kind of looking at the other side of this, another mind virus here in the context of religion. And again, we're going to be kind of looking at Christianity here, because, Logan and I were both raised Christian, and, living in the United States, obviously, that is the predominant religion in the West. But we're going to look at some of the parallels between these, and, how this also ties into the unconscious feedback loop, because this feedback loop is something that can play out in many, many different ways. So, taking and stepping and looking at some of the, the major ways that this plays out, and these two are also, statism and Christianity very, very much go hand in hand in how they support each other, how our society, especially, here in the West, is built and structured. So we're going to delve into looking at some of that. And a great place to start, I think, is looking at the very traumatic assumptions and premises that Christianity is actually that it's based on. So one of the very, very foundational, people can try to dress it up as, a love and light and forgiveness and all this, but we have to remember everything's built on a foundational assumption. And if you have a belief system that you think you need forgiven, well, why does it need forgiven? Because they hold a belief system known as original sin, what I like to call original self-imposed negativity, because it is a self-imposed negativity that and mindset that we accept upon ourselves when we do it to ourselves when we accept this belief system. But the idea that all people are kind of inherently evil, it's a very traumatic belief system for a human being to accept. It's
Very
a very
poisoned.
traumatic, very, very poisoned belief system for human beings to accept. And to tell little children this, again, very, very traumatic. I know, like, as a father, um, I remember looking at my son when he was born and thinking to myself, like, how could anyone believe in this, original sin? Like, how could anyone think that something this beautiful and this innocent is evil inherently? And that if it doesn't follow certain, you know, uh, dogmatic limitations of a belief, that it's going to be tortured for eternity. Like that's a very horrible belief system, and they don't like to focus on kind of that part of it. They like to try to put it on the love and light and the forgiveness and heaven and all this. But when you really look at it, there's some very horrible things about this belief system that it's built off of. And I think that idea of original sin is definitely one of those.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of something I was telling you earlier, Brian, about, something that I was kind of pondering over driving yesterday about, like, well, we're starting to become more outspoken and vocal about, Christianity and our feelings and kind of realizations about it. And so, again, I was raised Christian. My mother is still very much Christian. And, I was just kind of thinking, well, this is my calling, this is my purpose, and I intend to fully pursue it, regardless of what anyone else is thinking, because I'm following my own internal compass. But it stands to reason that there's a good chance that at some point she's gonna come across some of the material and realize where I stand with this, and she's probably not gonna like that very much. But the fact that she's gonna realize what I'm doing, she knows that I'm a good person. She knows my heart. She knows that I'm very pure intentioned and well-meaning. Yet her beliefs will lead her to conclude that I'm going to hell. She has to accept by her beliefs that her own son is going to be tortured in hot lava for the rest of eternity, even though she knows I'm a good person. But she's not going to reject that, even over the love of her son, and my torment. I mean, that's serious right there when you look at it like that.
Absolutely. And I know as a parent, there's no way I could ever accept a belief system that would have me think something about that, like about my child. It's really such a self-destructive and self-loathing thing to accept, and not only about yourself but other people. I mean, let's fucking say it's disrespectful. Let's outright call what it is. It's really not a respectful belief system, not only to have about yourself, but for other people to actually believe that you are inherently sinful, no matter what. That it's utterly ridiculous as well, that people actually still buy into this.
Which feeds the evangelical culture that comes hand in hand with Christianity, is because they're projecting that self-loathing on others and their original sin and saying, well, if I don't, share the love of the Lord, my friend over here is going to burn in hell too, and I just can't have that. I care too much about them. I need to save their soul. I mean,
Right,
it's so
yeah.
like narcissistic, really, and
Yeah.
this superiority complex and this self-importance,
Hmm. Yeah, I
all
mean, like
projected.
that. Just recently, that reminds me of oh, who is that asshole that got himself killed? John Chow, the guy that went and went onto this island with indigenous people that have been there, 50, 60,000 years, and goes on there thinking that they need to be saved, and he's going to teach them about Jesus or whatever, even though he could have with some kind of disease been carrying, wipe out their entire tiny civilization and tens of thousands of years of history, but he's so stuck in his own narcissistic ego that that he actually went and you know put these people's health and lives in danger just so he could spread his word of God, and that I mean, and
Absolutely.
that is
Save them.
and he is by far from the first one. That's how originally a lot of the saints and things came apart, because they would go and do things to piss off pagans or whatever. So then they would end up getting martyred, and then they would become, a saint. The early Christians, a lot of people don't realize that, some of these people were very, very just utterly insane, and, what they're trying to achieve. And again, taking things back to, we have to look at the foundation things are built on. When we look at this belief system and how it actually came into being, it's been a belief system that has been designed to control people from the beginning. It's a totally corrupted uh, mindset to take, and it really has led to our entire society being structured in the way it is. So it's so easy to dominate, and so many people. I mean, we can look in the West, even hand in hand, how many people that are also Christians are also very, very devout statists. You know,
Yeah.
um,
They got their
so
AR-15 in this hand and their Bible in this hand, and
yeah, yeah.
American flag flying behind them.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, I think this brings a point that how disrespectful a belief system is. That when you're accepting something like that, you can't really truly connect with others. Just like with statism, if you're accepting that they can't, they're not sovereign, they're not free beings that can control their own lives. With this, you're accepting that they're essentially evil. How can you really have a true connection with someone there? And you
Mm.
can't, because you've accepted some kind of unconscious traumatic belief system that's cutting you off from having a truly healthy relationship. And that doesn't mean that
Mm.
consciously you're not a good person, you're not doing that. But on some level, and on the subconscious and unconscious level, there's a traumatic and an unhealthy belief system there that is going to cut you off being able to connect fully on all the different levels, if that's what you're accepting about other people.
Right. It's about authenticity. This sort of this is a concept that comes up a lot for me, just because it's such a very potent, but also kind of more familiar sort of metaphor that I can use, and that's the battered wife uh, metaphor again. So, to think that he has a genuine connection with the abusive male. And, it's like, well, we have lots of good times now. I may get a little out of line sometimes, and he has to teach me a lesson, blah, blah, blah. That sounds exactly like the excuses people make for the government and for, God, Jehovah, whatever. It's the same exact thing. It's like, all these promises of threats of coercion on your soul, but yet as long as I don't get out of line, he loves me and he makes me feel special, and gives me all and blesses me and answers my prayers and all this kind of stuff. It's not an authentic relationship. Love is freedom. Love cannot be separated from freedom, period. If there's not freedom, there is not love. It's a law of the universe. It's not a genuine connection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And again, I think we can dive and look at getting into the projection more. That not only do they feel like they need a savior, so then they'll go around and assume that everybody else does. and project that onto them. But, with their self-loathing and their idea that they're sinful, they then go and project that onto everybody else. So there's a whole lot of this unconscious trauma and projectile vomiting going on when we can look at this and some of these interactions that this specific sect takes. And something I think here that's really useful to look at is how the fear of eternal damnation, not only for yourself, but for others, will actually motivate and lead you to try to perpetuate that mind virus. And we can see this with statism as well, that, when people get, they're afraid of whatever, they'll actually end up advocating and perpetuating that. So, that was something in our last talk that came up that we had mentioned, is that, as young children, thinking that, some relative who may not have been a Christian would be going to hell and being tortured. And then
it's horrible.
Try to talk to them, so that actually leads you to try to spread that belief system. So it's kind of like this self-feeding, this vicious cycle that's coming from trauma.
Hurt people.
Right, absolutely. And then it just perpetuates and continues to grow. And,
Right.
I think people really need to step back and look at this and be very honest. Because, especially in our society, this is a belief system that tends to kind of get looked at as very normal, and that, it's not harmful at all. It's good, or, whatever that may be. And that's just not the case. I'll just say it outright, and people can get offended if they want to. It's a mind virus. It absolutely is a mind virus that destroys the human consciousness and spirit. And it's something that really needs to be looked at honestly, so we can see what it is and how many areas in our society it actually affects. Because when you start honestly examining it, you can see how some of these foundational assumptions that are in this specific religion then get taken out and put into statism. They get put into all these other areas of our society. But if these foundational, belief systems and assumptions that came out of this, this religion weren't accepted, these other ones wouldn't be. So, I mean, look at the idea, even just the idea, humans, original sin were evil. And then the idea of statism, that human beings shouldn't be allowed to, they can't control themselves, so they need to be controlled.
Right.
So you're evil and you're too stupid, you need to be controlled.
Right. And what's the remedy
those go
for both?
hand in hand, and they're built off each other.
And it's Hegelian dialectic too. There's the problem that they're offering you, and then what's the solution? The savior.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
Whether it's Jesus or Daddy Trump,
Mm-hmm. Right.
My sky daddy and my earth daddy.
Right. And I think, another interesting thing to look at here is how this is a religion that leads to codependency. Like, really, really by default, because, by default, one of the base premises is that you can't save yourself. So right off the bat, you're codependent on something outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not a very healthy way to be at all. Any belief system that's telling you you're evil and that you can't save anything for yourself, but, somehow that's a belief system of love, that's gaslighting. That's something that's, putting you down, destroying you, traumatizing you, and then telling you that, it's love. That's not at all a healthy way to exist.
Yeah. And I just want to say codependency is actually the exact opposite of sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
That's the law of polarity. Those are the two polarities of this dynamic on opposite ends of the spectrum. You cannot be sovereign if you're codependent, and if you're not sovereign, you are codependent.
Mm-hmm.
That's why these narcissists, again, on the macro or the micro, in the large scale world stage, or in the ones that you're encountering in your day-to-day life, what's the one thing they're always trying to do? They're trying to look for something that you need so you can be dependent on them. They're trying to find a point of pain in your subconscious, some subconscious trauma, that's what we're talking about here, that they can exploit and then offer you the soothing remedy to that, right? In some sort of way that fits their agenda. That's the important thing to remember, though, too, is the solution is never for your benefit. It's always to serve their wants and needs.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, and the next thing I'd like to look at here, which you had brought up when we were talking earlier, was looking at the difference between Helheim, or hell in the Norse tradition, and hell in the Christian tradition.
That's
and
not a
how
coincidence.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. That is where the name came from, and that was part of trying to get the European pagans to convert to Christianity. But Helheim, for obviously hell in the Christian tradition probably doesn't really need any introduction. It's a place of torment and pain where all the unbelievers are sent to be punished in damnation
forever.
Forever.
That's the key word there.
You just get one chance, and if you fuck that up, you're just fucked forever.
You're toast, literally.
Yeah, you're toast. Yeah. We can laugh at it here because obviously, when you consider that from, if you're any kind of, truly a person that can apply critical thinking, you could really see how ridiculous that sounds. But then we can look at Helheim, which Helheim in the Norse tradition is not only is the realm associated with the unconscious mind, but in the mythology, it's where the old and sick go after they die. So, there's a couple different places in the afterlife, for the afterlife that, in the Norse tradition, you can go to Valhalla, you can go to Folknar, which are where the warriors that die in battle go living fearlessly, but the old and sick go to Helheim. And what this means when we look at it from an esoteric perspective is the people who didn't live fearlessly, that they allowed, whatever in their life they allowed everybody else to dictate their life. They didn't go after what their soul desire really was. So then they grew old and sick, and then they died. So then they go to Helheim, where Mother Hela is. And Mother Hela is a very interesting goddess. She, a lot of times, will appear as a corpse, and other times can appear as a beautiful woman, or half corpse and half, a mixture of that. So, and this is, depending on how she appears to you, is a reflection of what is in your unconscious mind. So if you have a lot of trauma, if you have a lot of things in your life that you need to work on, you're probably going to get the appearance of a corpse reflected back to you. But what Mother Hela does is, not only does she create the sacred space, but she is the sacred space that allows you for reflection. So in the Norse understanding, Helheim can be a place where you set up punishments for yourself for something you did, but it can also be a place of feasting and things like that, where you didn't experience what you wanted to in life. So then you have to go through a stage of reflection and looking back on whatever it was that you didn't accomplish, maybe what some of your mistakes were, whatever it is that you need to reflect and look back on so you can learn and grow through that. Helheim is the place where you go to do this. And then after that is done, you then go to, your next incarnation. So when we can fundamentally kind of break the two down to simply look at them, it really comes to the difference between what the animist and pagan mindset is really focused on growth for the soul. Whereas in Christianity, that's not what it's about. It's about punishment. It's about obedience and punishment if that doesn't happen. Much the same as, in statism with jail, you obey or you get punished, So, very interesting in how there's a difference in those. And one is really based in sovereignty and freedom and, true alignment with cosmic law. And the other is really based on, in short, psychopathy. Right. when you look at it.
And I'm just going to go ahead and say this. Both systems were designed by the same people. I don't mean literally the same. I don't mean like the same exact individual people living in the same time. I mean the same group of people that have the deepest form of knowledge about the mind and how to manipulate and control people on a mass fucking scale. And look,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these ideas, they're global.
Mm-hmm.
Religions and governments are all over the world, and they all work the same way, and they're all based in trauma.
Mm-hmm.
They understand to a science how we operate and how to manipulate and control us.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to throw that out there. This is not an accident.
Absolutely. And, I think, it's interesting to look at is, what these really do is they set people up for, like getting stuff. It's this unconscious feedback loop. It's like a hamster wheel of correspondence. Because, you have this feedback loop within yourself, within the individual, but then we have this feedback loop within society as well. So getting back to the theme of this talk is why history repeats. Because if
Right.
people are stuck in the same old unconscious feedback loop and cycle within themselves to where they can't change on the individual level, then we can see that play out in the macrocosm, on the societal level. And history just repeats itself over and over again. And
Right.
that's why these same techniques that have been working for such a long time still continue to work, because people are still unconscious of all of this,
And
again.
they're cutting themselves off from that new potential energy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, kind of as a good kind of one of the final points we can bring up here to look at, is just look back at history, and not an opinion here. I mean, go back and actually look at the facts of how many people, human beings have been, murdered, massacred, how many mass genocides have taken place, at the hands of these belief systems, both the belief system in, government and the right to rule, or, the belief system, of, religion and specifically, especially the Abrahamic, religions like Christianity and Islam. Very, very bloody history
Right.
behind
And
them.
and I just want to, interject this one point real quick, so because some one of the viewers might be thinking, well, people are, there's going to be bad people anyway. Yeah, that is absolutely true, and we're not saying otherwise. It's not like we would all just be, fairies and prancing around riding unicorns all day if there wasn't government or if there wasn't religion. That's not what we're saying. There, people, are, in different levels of consciousness. Each individual is in different levels of consciousness, and the law of nature says that the consciousness level as an average of the entire human race is going to dictate the experience that we have here. So the problem isn't that government and religion make people bad or murderous, but it gives them a platform to do so more easily and on a mass scale, and make them believe that they have the right to do it. That is
Mhm.
far more dangerous than some petty crook or even some lone serial killer out there picking people off. I mean, just look at the sheer numbers comparatively. Jeffrey Dahmer, the most, one of the most famous whatever serial killers, his numbers are like paled in a day on a global scale of bombing overseas and police killing people and
Mhm.
beheadings over fucking religion. I mean,
Mhm.
this is a no-brainer here if we're being honest with ourselves. You have
Right.
to suspend that emotional reaction that you might feel to the ideas being portrayed here. But if you're being honest with yourself about being honest with yourself, you'll realize that emotional reaction does not necessarily indicate truth, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you have a negative emotional reaction to truth simply
Mhm.
because you're not ready to hear or maybe accept it yet. And that's okay, but we're planting seeds here. We're just, when you hear something, you can't unhear it. So even if you're not ready to accept this today, here and now, you can't unhear what's being said, and maybe somewhere down the line that seed will grow and start to take growth there.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of give people a general finer reminder of, the theme of this is that, this is an unconscious feedback loop of trauma here. So as, Logan said, if you're feeling resistance to things, realize that, this is unconscious, or if you're thinking to yourself, oh no, that doesn't apply, that's not true. Keep in mind, these are things that are buried very, very deep on the level of society, and it's taken a lot of digging in order for us to kind of bring these up and look at them. And how we can go about actually addressing this, because you can't just consciously, especially, if you get raised in kind of a cult mindset like this, you can't just consciously go in and fix all that unconscious trauma without any kind of tool to do so. So starting with the arts of gnosis, one gives you a place to figure out your system mechanics of how you actually operate, both with yourself and, the reality field around you.
Which is astrology.
Right. But it also gives you, the ability to start figuring out your specific energetic needs. So you can actually, in a very scientific way, target the areas in your life that you need to work on, or you can target your unconscious mind and do ritual that will actually have an effect to that, because ritual has a very powerful effect on the subconscious and the unconscious mind. That's why our ancestors spent so much time doing ritual, and that's why they gained the wisdom they did.
Which is where the trauma is. So doing
Right.
Doing the affirmations every day consciously, or just thinking, oh yeah, this happened and it was bad, that's good, but that's not actually healing, and it's nowhere close.
Right. You have to address all the levels, and the subconscious and unconscious mind, one of the most useful tools to do that is through ritual. So, this is a reminder here, that we have our services available for the arts of gnosis, both 9 world rune readings, Vedic astrological consultations, and as well as the adaptive personal coaching. And we would also like to remind people to, if you have not yet, download our free initiation package, which you'll learn where to cast the circle of the Magi, as well as some other different meditation and energy practices. And we also have an announcement that we have some new paid and private content that will be coming out very soon here in the next few days, that will be available for people to look at, with some more advanced spells and some other advanced meditations for working with past karma and things like that.
Right.
So do you have any last minute things there, Logan?
Do we want to say what the name is, or are we holding on to that?
Yeah, we can go ahead and let the folks know.
Yeah, let the phoenix fly, as it were. So the package is called the Phoenix Package, and anyone who is familiar with that form of mythology, the phoenix is the firebird that bursts into flames in flight and falls to earth, and then is reborn again from its own ashes. There's a lot of different ways you can, that can relate to the mushroom that grows out of the same spore, and it's the cycle of life, and it's death and rebirth. And what is contained in this package is all about renewal, which, first you have to put to death that which is not serving you, and put that behind you, and then move forward into that new paradigm. And these are really going to get those energies moving. So, breaking loose old patterns, shaking up old stagnant energy, and clearing that space to bring in new. And this is going to be our first paid content, but it is at a very affordable price point. So I think it's a very good value for what you're getting. And so keep an eye out for that, because that's going to be coming out soon. I'm kind of putting the final edits on that video, and then we'll be getting it out there. So that's going to wrap up this episode this week. We hope that you found some value, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down there. That really helps us out. And I guess that's going to be it for tonight. So appreciate your watching. It means the world to us, me and Brian. And until next week, we'll see you next time. Until then, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.